It's hard to imagine a world today in which movies don't exist. Many of us have probably either Many of us have probably either gone to a movie theater or watched a movie from home. Multiple generations have experienced the excitement of seeing the newest blockbuster year in year out. Whichever the case, movies have had a huge impact on the world since their creation, and I want to show you just how and why films have had such an impact. But first, since we're on the topic of filmmaking, allow me to show you a short film I made as a visual aid for the project.
Hello?
Cindy,
Brandon?
do you have a moment?
What's up?
I need to talk to you about something.
What's wrong?
Listen, I don't think I'm going to be coming home anytime soon. Something's come up. There's something going around. They don't know what it is, or where it came from, or how to explain it. But it's lethal. And they think I have it.
I'm gonna miss you when you're gone.
You're all that I have. I need your help. Someone's after me. No one's allowed to travel.
It's okay, we're gonna figure this all out.
I'm coming home, Cindy. One way or another.
Brandon? Brandon?
I hope you all enjoyed that. Now, let's take a brief look at the origins of the motion picture. A motion picture is defined by Merriam-Webster's dictionary as a series of pictures projected on a screen in rapid succession with objects shown in successive positions slightly changed so as to produce the optical effect of a continuous picture in which the objects move. Going back to the late 1800s, motion pictures were first created by Thomas Edison when, after seeing a presentation by one Edward Muybridge on how a certain camera, called the zoopractoscope, which could manipulate multiple still images to give the impression that those images were all one fluid motion. Enthralled by this, Edison set out to make his own kind of camera that could also give the impression of still pictures moving, saying he wanted to make something that affected the eyes the same way a phonograph affected the ears. Edison did this by enlisting the help of one W.L.K. Dixon, an employee of Mr. Edison. Dixon, into photography and also on Edison's experimental staff, did the bulk of the work while Edison provided the funding for the project, and by 1892, Dixon and Edison had finished work on the first camera. This device was essentially the blueprint for motion picture cameras as we know them today. Aside from recording moving images, the device also had what was called a kinetoscope, which was essentially a viewfinder that allowed the filmmaker to see what they were filming. For the next year, Edison started exhibiting these new motion pictures to the public, and by 1894, was selling films theatrically. Edison is credited as the first person to commercialize motion pictures. One of Edison's most famous films would be The Great Train Robbery, made in 1903. Moving on, we're going to take a look at how films have affected people. This can happen in various forms. For instance, one may leave the theater with a feeling of nostalgia, or a politician may make a film, like a movie or documentary, for the purpose of pushing an agenda or a message. More on this later. Maybe someone left the theater feeling moved after seeing a generational film. My mom remembers seeing Star Wars A New Hope when she was a kid. I remember the feeling I had after seeing Avengers Endgame this past May. Walt Disney said this: "We don't make movies to make money. We make money to make more movies." Meaning that, for those who have a passion for filmmaking, they should want to make movies not for the money, but rather for the sake of making a movie. Vika Shaw, an award-winning author, takes a look at the economic role movies play in society. He discusses how films bring in billions of dollars each year, and noted that back in 1963, the country of India was influenced more by movies than both books and newspapers. In 2019, there was a reported 1.24 million movie viewers in the US alone, and that number had gone down from previous years. To summarize, what Shaw is showing here is that films can have a huge influence on a population. Now, let's take a look at how films reach an audience. One of the best ways for this is through the movie story. Without a good script, a movie can only go so far. A poorly written story can turn an audience off, negatively affect the acting, directing, and generally won't lead to anything good. There's a multitude of stories that filmmakers will tell. Some are personal, some are the stories of others, like a biopic. Some stories are told for the sake of sending a message, or it could be a combination of reasons. As we saw earlier, a good example of this would be during times of war. As we saw earlier this semester, people like Hitler would make otherwise cinematic films for the purpose of manipulating his citizens, for the purpose of getting behind him and doing his bidding. These films are very cinematic and were made not only to show Hitler in the best way possible, but also to degrade the Jews as well. Hitler's head of propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, is credited for saying this: "We are convinced that films constitute one of the most modern and scientific means of influencing the mass. Therefore, the government must not neglect them." This goes back to how films influence people. One such film, The Eternal Jew, was made after the start of World War II as a way to further make the Jews look bad, specifically those in Poland, as well as to get more Germans to back Hitler. While World War II was famous for its propaganda from both the Allied and Axis powers, there's another war from which propaganda was almost a lifestyle. Starting in 1949, the Cold War lasted all the way to 1991. Between the United States and Soviet Union, the Cold War was more of a battle of ideas than nuclear strength. During the course of the Cold War, the US, first with the government, then later with film studios, showed the benefits and happy families that were the product of a capitalist society, while depicting the Soviet Union as trying to destroy the American way of life. Film Red Nightmare, made in 1962, is a good illustration of this. It shows the Soviet Union having made entire life-size replicas of US cities for the sole purpose of teaching Soviet spies how to best infiltrate and destroy the US as we know it, renaming the country the Soviet States of America. Now that we looked at filmmaking in history, let's move on to the psychology aspect of filmmaking. A lot of how a film comes across psychologically would be in the cinematography, music, and editing. A famous example of this would be the Kuleshov effect, named after one Lev Kuleshov, born in Russia in 1899. Lev worked as a film teacher and filmmaker, making both movies and documentaries, the latter of which covered events such as the Russian Civil War. It was during this time that Kuleshov became enthralled in how editing could be used to change an audience's view on a film, and he originally called it the Soviet montage theory, which later went on to become known as the Kuleshov effect. The goal of the experiment was to show a man's expressionless face and pair it with other photos, and while the man's expression wouldn't change, the audience's perception of the photos would change with each picture the man was paired with. This ties into propaganda. In the 1935 Leni Riefenstahl film, Triumph of the Will, we see Hitler portrayed in a godlike manner. Unless it's a wide shot of the former German leader, the lighting and camera work is done in a way that shows Hitler as imposing. The camera work is a lot of the time equal in height to Hitler or pointed up at him, which succeeds in showing Hitler as a more imposing, authoritative figure, and the music, sounding triumphant, backs this. This is a perfect example of the Kuleshov effect, as the documentary shot and edited in a way that shows Hitler as the savior of Germany, while also manipulating the German citizens into further supporting Hitler. Compare it to someone making a documentary on a third world country. A filmmaker could shoot and edit the film in such a way that shows the country on the brink of extinction, or they could say make the film showing how the people in that country have managed to survive despite their struggles. But simply, editing can be huge in how a film comes across to its audience. Famed filmmaker George Lucas, known for films such as American Graffiti and the Star Wars franchise, discovered his love for editing while attending film school at USC in the 1960s. In fact, the first short film that Lucas ever made, titled Look at Life, was edited in such a meticulous way that it not only went above and beyond the assignment that Lucas was making the film for, but also went on to win multiple awards in various film festivals. Fast forward to 1976 and early 1977. George Lucas is working around the clock to finish post-production on a new sci-fi film called Star Wars. It had already been a nightmare to get the movie filmed, and now, in post-production, Lucas was struggling to get the film finished. He had to fire his first editor, whose rough cut of the film had been atrocious. To get the film finished, Lucas tagged Paul Hirsch and his then-wife Marshall Lucas, who were both accomplished editors in their own rights. Lucas also had to oversee a special effects company, Industrial Lights and Magic, which went on to become one of the top special effects companies in the world, but at the time, despite having talented people working on the visual effects, production on these effects had been going slowly, and Lucas had to step in to oversee the company and make sure they were getting the shots in. Eventually, everything came together, including the music, and the rest, they say, is history. A New Hope went on to win multiple Oscars, including one for Best Editing. What Lucas, Hirsch, and Marcia had wanted to do with the film was make something that wasn't generic, but rather had a life of its own. This goes to show how editing can have a huge impact on how films are perceived. If A New Hope had been edited to a slower pace, then the feedback for the films would have been much different. It was a combination of editing, cinematography, and music that helped make Star Wars what it is today. One more way a film can impact people is through its music. In a 2014 experiment done by the University of Nottingham, participants took part in an interactive drama. During the experiment, the participants were said to have become more invested in the play due to the music. In the 2002 DreamWorks animated film, Spirit's Telling of the Cimarron, Hans Zimmer and Bryan Adams collaborated to make a soundtrack that reflected the thoughts and emotions of the protagonist, Spirit, which is the horse. Put simply, a film soundtrack can help get and then keep an audience engaged in the film. Through the course of this video, I discussed why people make films, how they affect people, and the effect they've had in history. From the story to the music, films have been made for multiple reasons, both good and bad, and will continue to have a lasting impact for generations to come. I hope everybody's come away with a better understanding of how films have impacted society.